Microphone. Welcome to Conversations with Catholics, episode 18 or something, whatever we're on. I am very, very, very excited for this episode because this is the first episode that I have with a Catholic priest. Welcome, Father Brown. I'm very excited to have you here.
I'm very honored to be here. Thank you so much. I'm glad we can make this work.
Yeah, me too. So, Father Brown, I would like to start off by complimenting you on your name. There's another Father Brown who's probably one of my favorite Catholic priests of all time, Father Raymond Brown. So you're in excellent company, not just for the fact that your name is Father Brown, but also I have I'm going to call it a newfound appreciation for the Jesuits because of, and I'm going to be off camera for just a second, but this book... Oh, where is it? I've got my list of Catholic books right here. How the Catholic Church Built the West. This book has a whole chapter dedicated to the Jesuits in it. And I don't think I ever fully appreciated the Jesuit contribution to science and just like European history and culture. So there's a bunch of reasons I'm excited to have you on, but those are just two of them. So I just wanted to start off.
There's been a handful of Jesuits that have made the Jesuits seem smart, so it's been great. I've been riding on that reputation for a while.
Hey, milk it for as long as you can. Also, thank you, SJ. SJ says that Kevin cracks her up. Hey, I have one person who thinks I'm funny. Woohoo! That's all I need. I made it. Okay, so Father, you and I were talking over email about what kind of conversation were we going to have today? What was the agenda for today's call? Right. And I think that the topic that we kind of settled on was the absurdity or the uncomfortableness that kind of accompanies some of the worldviews that I seem to have kind of fallen into over the past couple of years.
Sure.
So those worldviews being just to make sure that all my cards are on the table for the audience. I'm an agnostic. I'm a nominalist. I'm a mereological nihilist. I'm a moral anti-realist. Enough to give anybody probably the sweats from all the uncomfortableness that comes with it. And so I think that each one of those topics could probably take up, a 5-hour-long conversation each. Sure. So we're not going to get through all of them. But what do you say, Father? You want to pick one of them and see how we do?
I guess, yeah. I think that's great. And rather than even pick one of them, I would love to just kind of maybe lay out some of the groundwork of why it matters, right? Why does it even matter? Like, why are you anything-ist, So maybe you can talk about that a little bit. Why, when Socrates says, the unexamined life is not worth living, what is that? Where does that lead you to? Where do you go with that? Yeah.
So this was something that I struggled with, I think, for a little bit when I first kind of and I don't know if I love the term, but deconstructed. Why do anything, right? Why does any of this matter? And I kind of came to a conclusion, and this is going to sound a little selfish, but here it is. I just kind of care about knowing true things and disbelieving false things. That's kind of it. It's very Kevin centered. It's just, I care about true stuff, so it matters to me. So I'm going to try to figure out what's true.
Listen, I think that's very human, right? This is the human project. It separates us from, as far as we can tell, there are no other animals that worry about these things, and yet we do. And I don't think there's anything negative about the way that you described that at all.
Okay, cool. And then there's a second selfish reason as well, and it's that some of these questions seem like they have a pretty big impact on potentially eternity. So that's kind of a big deal. Sure. If I'm wrong about enough stuff theoretically, if I'm maybe not just wrong about enough philosophical suppositions, but if I go about things the wrong way, the stakes seem pretty darn high. I mean, it doesn't get higher than eternity. So I figure that if I've got the means to actually spend time thinking about these questions, it makes a lot of sense, even if it is for the selfish reason of just, I care about my afterlife.
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, I guess caring about these things is going to be part of it. The afterlife is going to be part of it. I think also that if you've got a real love for the truth, I'm seeing S.J. Thomason says the quest for the truth is important. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I think also like the tools for approaching life are important as well, and that's where you wind up with the labels and the isms and the ists and all this kind of stuff. Is what set of tools am I comfortable using? What set of tools am I even able to use? Right. So some of these things I think are hard to even really engage for a lot of people. But if you are comfortable engaging them, why do you sort of like set why are you using the tools that you're using to be able to engage some of these bigger questions? I guess would be another good question to start with.
So why am I using the tools? And like by tools, do we just mean like why are we using like reason to try to figure stuff
Well,
out?
okay, so yeah, so there's reason, and by using reason, I think you're already kind of giving into uh, I think you're giving into a worldview right away, right? So you can't be a total and complete utter nihilist
Mm-hmm.
if you're beginning to, if you're using reason to engage the world, or at least not without giant contradictions. And I think I'm assuming that you're okay, with the law of non-contradiction. I'm assuming that that's a good that's a
Yes.
good place. I can count on
Identity,
you.
non-contradiction, excluded
Right.
middle. I'm in.
Okay.
I'm in.
All
I'm
right.
committed.
All right. Very good. Yeah. So okay. So then I suppose, okay, so a lot of times the theist is sort of like, people would put the burden on the theist to prove God and all that kind of stuff. And I find like proof of God and all this to begin with, all that stuff is not always the best place. I always ask the question of like, why would you begin using the tools that you would use to find the answers? And for myself, I've got a long history, and really what I think is what marks humanity as humanity. So we know that we're both on a quest for truth as a mark of our humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to be using these tools that humanity has used for thousands of years to engage these questions. I find a lot. I find that since middle of the 17th and middle of the 18th century, you've got people who've said, let's throw out those tools and let's try some new ones. And I find that that you get a hodgepodge of results when you do that. And so you have some people who are, they're an atheist because, some of it's a protest atheism, right? So I can't believe in any of the images of God that I've been presented, and so therefore I must be an atheist. Some might be nihilist, some might be materialist, right? And so unless you can kind of make it all fit into the into the measurable, quantifiable result, all those kind of things. So to me, when you're dealing with that those set of tools, tell me what attracts you to those tools as opposed to your traditional philosophical theological tools that humankind's been using for a very long time.
Yeah. So I think that pretty much the thing that like, kind of undergirds my attraction, for lack of a better term, to the positions that I have are, or probably is, and like, I sometimes I'm almost embarrassed to admit, my engineering degree. So I went to school for engineering. I'm very empirically minded. And so earlier today, I was having a conversation with somebody who's better versed in philosophy than I am, John Buck. And he made a joke. He said, Kevin, it almost seems like you do philosophy backwards, because a lot of the like the ancients, I guess, kind of started with themselves and then went outwards with their philosophy, whereby empiricism is almost the opposite. Empiricism is let's start with the outside and then kind of work our way back in. And when you start with empirical tools rather than tools that, perhaps the ancients would have relied on, I think you wind up kind of coming to this like post-enlightenment kind of, I imagine myself as your typical post-enlightenment, like, for better or for worse. I feel like I'm your typical post-enlightenment kind of thinker, Hume, And I think that my reliance on those tools comes in large part due to my education as an engineer, which is very, very empirical.
Right. I would say that I've watched, I don't know, I watch it at 2x speed, so I might have gotten through some of your videos a little bit quickly, but from what I've watched, I would say that it sounds like those are the kind of currents that you feel most comfortable being in. So I don't want to presume anything that you believe, or if I ever say anything that's not quite what you believe, feel free to correct me right away.
Oh,
But
sure.
I'm trying. I guess that's sort of where I would want to start. I still would want to wrap my mind around, why you would embrace what you would embrace, and those kind of things. So, I think for the, to go back to that human question, what are the desires of the human heart that seem to set us apart from, from all the other animals in the world and all that kind of stuff? And it seems to me, like plain to me, that the biggest and most important things that we seek are really not empirically testable at their core, right? So seeking truth, for example, truth itself, if you try to examine it through all of the way through the rational mind, you're going to break the rules of logic. If you try to examine truth but through the lens of truth, you're going to be performing a contradiction there. I'd say the same thing about love. I'd say the same thing about beauty. You can't see beauty with through a microscope. You can't do those sorts of things. So truth and love and beauty and justice and ultimately being itself, to me, seem like the most important things in the world. And they also all have in common an inability to be really parsed, through the tools that are more empirical. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I think here's where we get into the uncomfortable parts, I think, of some of my worldview. Sure. Because I don't think that beauty, strictly speaking, exists. And it gets worse, right? So I don't think that love, strictly speaking, exists, right? I mean, and it gets worse from there. I don't think that numbers, strictly speaking, exist. All of this stuff comes from nominalism. So I don't think that universals exist. So that's probably a pretty good place to start. And maybe I can kind of give you like the elevator pitch for why I'm a nominalist. And like we'll take it from there. So yeah, let's hear it. So Kevin, you love your wife, don't you? Like, yes, of course I do. Okay, Kevin, so you're not a nominalist because you love your wife. Okay, hold on. The way that I view it is this. When I say I love my wife, I'm not actually committing myself to a kind of realism about universals. Rather, I am speaking fictionally, or I'm speaking with the vulgar. Vulgar not meaning like curse words. Vulgar just meaning like with the people. And so, what am I actually saying then? If I'm not committing myself to these universals, what am I actually saying? Well, I think what I'm actually saying when I talk about love is some kind of mix of chemical and electrical impulses in the neurons within my brain that are releasing some amount of dopamine or something like that.
Yep.
Which is admittedly an uncomfortable position to hold because it's pretty non-romantic. You know what I mean? It's
yeah, sure.
The magic is gone, kind of.
Yeah. So my desire is not to preserve the magic.
Right.
I would be okay. I would be okay if that's what you're saying. Like, there's no problem of you saying, "Hey, my chemicals are producing this result," But it seems like there's this phenomenon that throughout human history of altruistic behavior that is understood. So not simply, hey, the way that a mother lion takes care of her cubs, it seems like there's an understanding that's behind all of it, that the more it's understood, the deeper it gets and becomes less and less of it begins in sense of a rational choice, right? So there are going to be actions that I can and performances that I can engage in, and I can say, I'm going to buy. I'm not married, but I imagine if I were married, I would say, okay,
you're married to the church, right?
I'm married to the church, right? Okay. So if I were married, I would say, I'm going to get some flowers for my wife, right? I'm going to do a thing for my wife, and then not only am I doing that thing, but it's also increasing ultimately a kind of a what we'd call love. A guy who really loves his wife occasionally gets her flowers. I hope I don't get you in trouble.
She's not listening. It's okay.
There are ways, right? Or at least you tell your wife that she's beautiful, or you do nice things for your wife. You begin to serve her in a way that other people don't, and that you serve her in a way that you don't serve other people. And there are all these things that we call love, and we call this, a special kind of love. This is a romantic love, but even then there's other kinds of love. There's sort of this, friendship, brother, we can go through the 4 loves of, C.S. Lewis and all that, where like, these are just sort of like helpful rule of thumb. but there seems to be something that permeates all those things. And it also seems to be a thing that I want to a limitless degree. Like, this is the same trick that I want to try, if you would call it a trick, same trick that I would want to try with truth. Like, okay, so if truth is just chemical connections, of associations, let's say, so is it true that you have on a green t-shirt today, or is it true that that we're speaking over the internet or whatever? These are all just sort of like neurons and associations with chemicals that said ultimately this is all just happening in a material world. But we have this desire for a truth that would be unlimited, that would be and we seem to have a tacit awareness, at least, that is a thing. Now, you may say, I'm going to talk myself out of that belief, right? I'm going to talk myself out of believing in a limitless truth. But still, it feels like, certainly I feel like I have this awareness that there is a limitless truth that no amount of instantiated truth is going to ultimately fill. It's never going to be completely explained that way. And both with love and with truth and with beauty and with justice and with being, those things seem to all be hitting me from above in a way that if I'm going to let them be what they really are, I have to let them control me in a way that is unlike the way I control other things. So I control the vehicle that I drive. I control even some aspects of some relationships that I have. But when I love, it feels like it's coming from above me, and I feel like I have to say yes to it. If I turn around and control it, that love becomes, in the sense of romantic love, it becomes lust. In the sense of, other kind of love, it becomes manipulation, that sort of stuff. Same thing with truth. If I take truth and I don't let it change me, if I take truth and I manipulate it, it becomes something other than truth. Like, it loses its truthiness. Love loses its,
I think, is that the technical term?
That's the technical term.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the more I try to put it beneath me and instrumentalize it, the less it is what I want. And the more I let it change me, the more it is what I want. Which is, you could probably see where I'm going with all this, is that ultimately this is because I believe God is truth, and because I believe God is love, and because I believe God is beauty and justice and being itself. This is why I can honestly say that I worship those things, because I cannot put them underneath me and then they remain what they are. They lose themselves as soon as I put them underneath me, and they have to stay above me. I just got real woo-woo with my language.
No, I think,
apologize, but
I think I followed. And SJ seems to be following. I think that SJ pretty succinctly summarized your stance there. So Jesus is truth and love. I think if you were only limited to 4 words and 1 character, I think that might be a good way to do it. But if you don't mind, I'll kind of rewind a little bit to, you said something, and I'm gonna repeat what I think that you said, and I'll ask you to either correct me or confirm, deny. So
sure.
You said something to the effect of, you have an intuition that there is limitless love and limitless truth and limitless beauty. Is that about right?
Well, if we mean the same thing by our words, yeah. So when I say limitless,
that's the hard part.
I don't, yeah. When I say limitless, what I mean is a thing which isn't limited by any instance of it. So it's not like limitless love, like, oh, we just need to all love each other more, and there could be more love in the world, and we can do that until there's no end. I mean that every instance of love has in it some quality from a limitless place, right? So I'll give you an example of something that doesn't work with red. Like, take the color red. You know that if we're talking about refracted light models, that to speak in geek speak right here, it's like, that the FF 0000 or the 255 00 is red in its reddest red. You can't get more red than that, and you've reached the limit of how red something can get. Truth doesn't seem to work that way, and love doesn't seem to work that way. And so you can compare reds and you can say this is more red than that by how close it gets to that 255 00 redness, right? but it doesn't seem to work that way with those other transcendentals I'm talking about. They are limitless in the sense that there seems to always be an uninstantiated source of things that truth gets compared to. Truth in this world, every truthful statement gets compared to, every act of love gets compared to, and that's what I mean by limitless.
Yeah. So maybe we could say limitless, like, slash something like the perfect example of, or something like that.
Transcendental, yeah. The transcendental it.
Okay, yeah. So I think that what I can say is that I don't think that I share that intuition. And what I mean by that is, so I'll borrow your red example. It doesn't get redder than, like, 25500 or whatever the reddest red is. I don't know.
Right.
And I think that in the same way, so and here, color is an interesting one, because color actually has an analog in reality, and that is like the wavelength of the light as it hits your eyeball.
Precisely, exactly, and that's why it's not the same thing as truth. And
yes,
that's why it's not
yes.
the same thing as love.
Right. But I think that I just don't share the same intuition about truth and beauty and love. And I think, and I blame a lot of things on my engineering degree, but I think that a large part of why I see it like that is because I studied chemical engineering. And so I just, I think the classic example that I use is like the law of the conservation of energy. So there doesn't appear, we appear to be able to perfectly describe why humans do what they do, relying only on the physics and the chemistry of the body and the brain. No love universal, no abstracta of love need factor into our explanation of causality. So if this stuff is, it's stuff here just being abstracta, love and beauty and truth, if they're all causally inert, then I kind of go back to the Catholic William of Ockham, and just kind of apply Occam's razor there. And I say, like, if it's causally inert, I'm not sure I need to posit that and multiply it into my ontology. I think I can get by without it.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, I get it. I think though, the best way, if you want to go to Occam's razor, I think the best way to describe some of this might be, and Occam would not have said this because he wasn't living in our world, but if I look at, for example, if I look at a computer screen, I could say on that computer screen, I've got all of the pixels, the colors, the lights, the shades, the whatever, for me to see Kevin on a computer screen, and I have no reason to need to believe in a real Kevin that's behind all of this. I just see its instance on the screen, and that I need to believe in a Kevin behind the Kevin that I see on the screen? In fact, if I take a pencil and I stab my computer screen, the screen's going to go blank. And I say, look, it's clearly just a bunch of pixels and a bunch of, I don't really know how the mechanics of a computer screen work, but I think there's some kind of gel involved in there. And whatever it is, and there's electricity running through it. And if I cut that cord, it all goes dark. And I could say, look, for all intents and purposes, I have just destroyed, I've everything that was Kevin, I've just destroyed it with the pencil or with the scissors that I cut the cord with or whatever. And I've like, clearly it's just this, right? And then that sounds like what you're saying. Like that sounds like what you might be saying. It's like, because I don't need to believe in a thing behind it. It's more likely that it's just the thing I see. And I'm saying how hard that is for me to feel at ease with. Yeah. In saying that every instance of love is all there is, and there's not an actual love quality. That is real in a non-physical sense, but still real. That there's this love quality that exists that I call God, and same thing with truth, and same thing, and that's why I think we run into limits that don't destroy the thing itself. So for example, I can tell every now and then I tell a white lie, right? Every now and then I tell an untruth. Every now and then I massage the truth to suit me. Every now and then I find myself, and I call that, I mean, that's ultimately what I call sin, because I'm like, oh, something's wrong with this. Like something definitely feels wrong, that I'm using truth or manipulating truth into a lie. And now there feels like a moral evil that's being, there feels like something's broken with this whenever I do it. And if it were just a matter of, again, chemicals and neurons and associations and pixels on a screen, and if everything were just the material world, I don't know how or why I would constantly feel that brokenness or that sinfulness in what's happening here, right?
Yeah.
And again, cradle Catholic, cards on the table. I may have just been so programmed by my parents to believe everything that I believe. But even in moments and things where I've rebelled against my parents, or even in ways in which my parents could never have explained any of those things to me, I've found myself coming to conclusions that are finally most believable and most satisfying to me in a model that includes that includes that tacit awareness. And it's like I can't deny that tacit awareness of the transcendental thing that I'm talking about.
Yeah. I'll respond to two different things. First, just really quick about like the pixels and, why believe in a Kevin behind the pixels, right?
Right.
I'll just do this one real quick, because I think your second point was actually kind of meatier. Like there's more there to it. Okay. But real quick, I actually would say that, stabbing your screen with a pencil and seeing no Kevin behind your screen is actually a really good test that you could perform if you were actually wondering if Kevin is really in your screen, Mm-hmm. And then, you stab the screen and you realize that all the pixels go black and you're like, Kevin isn't really in my screen. I think that actually does work. Because of course I'm not in your screen. I'm on,
Yeah, but it would seem like there's no more Kevin back past my screen. If I stab my screen, you disappear. Mm-hmm. So like I guess I'm comparing it to when you hit somebody in the head with a hammer and their personality seems to go away, maybe like they go unconscious, and you see that person was really just a bunch of chemicals. It's just the chemicals inside of a skull, inside of a whatever. And as soon as I bang those chemicals around, the person goes away. You know what I'm saying? And I'm making that as a comparison to a computer screen. See, if I break the computer screen, the person just goes away. So he must have just been a computer screen. But I'm left with knowing that you're more than a computer screen. So I'm wanting to say that the people I know who respond to being banged with a hammer on the head.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that, what's up, Kyle? I think that the symmetry breaker, that I'll call it here, is there are other empirical tests that you could run after you stab your screen with the pencil and, Kevin disappears.
Right.
You could, we could meet up and you could do some empirical tests to see if I'm here. Mm-hmm. The same doesn't appear to apply with things like love and truth and stuff like that. Beyond the individual instances of love, there doesn't seem to be a way for me to find out whether or not this universal of love exists. And that's really uncomfortable. And that was kind of the second part, I think, of what you were talking about. Because I think you said that it just seems really, really, like, I don't think you said dark, but I'll say it seems really dark if love, like if there is no, like, boundless love, if there is no boundless truth. And I frankly agree. I frankly agree.
Yeah, I would say yes, but those aren't the words that I use. But I would say that darkness or there being all this bad, that's not going to hold me back from believing what I think is true, right? Mm-hmm. So like, uncomfortable conclusions is not my problem. It's more dealing with what tools do I have to access those parts of my life that need examining, right? And so I as fascinating as I find the mechanical world, the material world, as fascinating as I find it all, I feel like we have some pretty good tools to look at those things, right? So I'm very impressed with science. I love science. You know, it's like it's interesting to me, and I never find myself bored with it or anything like that. But then I find myself still with bigger, I shouldn't say bigger questions, but they feel bigger, a bigger desire to examine those things that I certainly feel aware of, like love and truth and all those kind of things, and that I have to almost turn off parts of my brain's functioning to believe it's just material. Do you know what I mean? So it's not like it's the darkness of the conclusion I'm okay with. Like I want to believe that I would believe any conclusion that I ultimately came to and rested on after lots of work. But no conclusion I've ever come to, even when I've tried on for size all kinds of different ways of thinking, have I been able to say, that makes sense. I always find myself saying, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me that truth is just a bunch of neurons, or that love is just a bunch of chemicals floating around in your brain and all those things. Like to me, I'm left with a very uncomfortable. It's certainly uncomfortable, but it's like I'm left with something feels unanswered, something feels undone, like that. Like I haven't gone far enough to explain it all. You know?
Yes. Let me ask a clarifying question though.
Okay.
Is this seeming of yours that like it seems like this stuff is really true? So who cares whether or not it would be dark or not? If it's if you have this intuition, then we should believe it, right?
Well, I think you have to deal with it. I don't, whether we should believe it or not, I don't know, but we definitely have to deal with it. So, for example, when I was a kid, I went to see the magician David Copperfield, and man, that guy was good. One or two things I could kind of figure out, but some of it was like, no matter how hard I tried, I could not figure it out, right? And so I put myself on the quest I went and checked out books from my local library, like how to do magic and all this kind of like, how did this guy do this, you know? And as I slowly but surely figured it out, that he was an illusionist, as he claimed himself to be, that he wasn't using any, real sense of magic. These were just illusions and all this kind of stuff. It was like, okay, I found myself satisfied that there's probably answers like this for the rest of it, that I haven't figured out every trick that he's got, but I figured out enough of these tricks to see that this guy's hiding something in his hand that's behind his back, whatever it is, right? There's this still though, I call it it's not just me. Bernard Lonergan calls it this, a tacit awareness. It's like, it's not the same thing of an awareness of like, I'm awareness if the lights are on or off. It's this tacit awareness. Like it's this thing that is mysteriously just out of reach of being able to tangibly touch. And I feel compelled to have to I feel compelled to have to understand that more. And rather than say there's nothing to understand there, which feels like, okay, well then now I got to explain why I feel why I feel it, right? Like, am I just under some big illusion? Is my whole life under some big illusion? Which would be very uncomfortable. Oh. But if you can convince me of that, I would accept it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, like I would accept whatever there is for that. But then there's this other part of me that just says, well, why not use 2,000 years worth of tools or 2,500 years worth of tools to examine that stuff that does require me to believe in, in at least the Platonic forms, that does require me to at least believe some of those things,
Yeah. I'll make a joke. Not a joke, but you just used my dad's favorite argument. And my dad's favorite argument is my dad is interested in apologetics, and he's interested in defending what he believes and why, and just, I think you might know this, Father, but I grew up in like an FSSP traditionalist household, so like very right. very Catholic. But my dad's favorite argument is hey, I've got 2,000 years of wisdom on my side, and even if I don't fully understand one church teaching, the rest of them make sense to me, and I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt on this last one. That's like my dad's like favorite like go-to line.
That's definitely warm to me. That definitely sounds warm. I mean, like, so the history of atheism, right? If you look at all this, there have been people who have worked so hard to come up with an account for the reality that most of us feel, that it's almost to the point where, like, when somebody says they don't feel it, okay, this is going to sound very insulting, and I don't mean to insult you at all, right? But it's like when somebody says, I don't have that tacit awareness of the reality of love and truth and all that, I'm like, well, Helen Keller also didn't have, the facilities for those things. It doesn't make Helen Keller right, so I'm like, when you look at all of humanity and you see all these people struggling to get there, and even the atheists, there are some, I'm sure you would agree, some atheists who are at least as bad as some of the theists in explaining why they believe what they believe, right? So like there's so much confusion out there. There's so much of all that I don't want to. I haven't yet read an atheist who I really like, except for maybe, like, I might like them for one or two aspects of what they say. So I mentioned, I think once when talking with Kyle Whittington, that I like to read Sartre every now and then, or Camus, and these kind of French existentialists, and I kind of lump them together. And I'm not, I'm no expert on what they had to say, but every now and then what they say sounds so much like a horror movie that I'm fascinated by it. I'm like, oh, that's what it would look like if I didn't believe in God. That's what it would look like, if that's what I would have to accept if I didn't believe in God. Now, again, I would accept it if I thought it were true, but I'm like watching these other guys and go, gosh, that is so amazing. And often I find atheists have insights into the ugliness of a world that, like, I can look at death and say, oh yeah, but I believe in an afterlife. And these guys look at death and they're like, there ain't nothing after this. And I'm like, oh wow, wow, that's I'm just kind of left saying, wow, like I would believe them if I thought they were right. But it is amazing to see, once you commit to that worldview, it's a horror movie.
Yeah, I mean, SJ just brought up the Richard Dawkins quote, "Nothing but pitiless indifference." I think that's what Dawkins said is right. Like when you're dead, like nature has nothing but pitiless indifference for you. And something that I will add is I don't call myself an atheist, and
sure,
I feel like sometimes people kind of look at me a little funny. They're like, but aren't you one, Kevin? And my go-to response is always this: it depends on what you mean. If atheist to you means what it means in the philosophy textbooks, then no, not really. Because I'm not somebody who has like these really strong arguments that say, therefore, God could not possibly exist. I don't have that. I don't have that. Yeah. Sometimes people think the lack theist definition of the word atheist, and perhaps I do fit that definition of the word, but that to me just means agnostic. And so I use the label agnostic. And then a third reason I don't use the atheist term is I feel like the atheist label has a lot more like connotated with it, even if it's not literally part of the definition, than just disbelief in a God. Like, I think that there's like a lot of like political kind of connotations with the word atheist that just frankly don't fit me very well. Like I wouldn't fit in with like a, if the atheists formed like a political party, I don't think I would agree with some things, certainly, but
the atheists, that's a big lump together.
That's true.
Thing. It would be like the theists. I mean, listen, there's a lot that I could agree with, let's say, a Hindu or something like that, but there's a whole lot that I wouldn't agree with, that even about the nature of God, right? So I often get somewhat perturbed whenever people, like, I almost want to tell them I'm an atheist too, whenever they say, like, well, you don't believe in Odin, you don't believe in Vishnu, well, I just believe in one fewer gods than you. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't work at all. Like, that's not at all what we're talking about here. Like, that's not at all. That's like, I mean, the whole conversation that you and I have are having started with questions about truth and beauty and like transcendental truths, of which Odin and Vishnu are not. That those aren't the same things. And yet, S.J. Thomason and I are both agreeing that God is truth and love.
Yeah. And it's funny too. Like I am not a fan at all of the like one fewer God thing. Particularly because like you go back to like Plato and Aristotle, and they are like Thomistic in the way that they describe. Obviously, Thomas Aquinas is built on.
Thomas is more Aristotle.
Yes. But when you read it, when you read Aristotle, it's like shockingly almost Christian sometimes. Like, not all the time, but sometimes.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
So that's why I think that the one fewer God argument is just kind of silly,
Right.
And so that's another reason why I don't use the term atheist. Now,
Right.
sometimes, like in shorthand, if somebody says like, "What religion are you?" Sometimes I'll like, if I don't want to talk to them, I'll just be like, "I'm an atheist. Go away."
Hmm.
But
Sure.
I try to be more precise with my language, so I don't call
Yeah.
myself an atheist.
Yeah.
But it's a fair analogy to me anyway, because I
Yeah.
think that me and the atheists probably share like a decent amount of like philosophical overlap.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So there's a dirty philosophical trick that I'm not going to pull. So I want to lay it out on the table so that you know that I'm not trying to pull it. But if I said something like, hey, do you believe this microphone exists? And you would say, yes, I believe that microphone exists. And then I would say, okay, well, that microphone is my God. Therefore, you believe in my God.
got me.
Right. So I got you. Right,
Got me.
So that's the dirty philosophical trick that I'm not trying to pull.
Mm-hmm.
But it is one where I say, like, do you believe in truth? Do you believe in love?
Yeah.
Do you believe in beauty? And if you do, then you're believing in my God,
If you don't mind, I'm actually going to kind of take your argument and like turn it on myself and kind of like give you a little something, like maybe a point where we can probably agree on this.
Okay.
So sometimes people will say something to me along the lines of like, well, do you think that it's turtles all the way down? And I'll say like, no, I don't think it's turtles all the way down. I don't think that the universe extends infinitely into the past. I think that there was a beginning, and things started in motion at some point. So there had to be, there was some kind of origin point. Now I have no idea how to describe this thing, but sometimes my conversation partner here will say, that's what I call God. Just the thing that kickstarted it all. Like, as long as you don't think it's turtles all the way down, you agree with me. And at that point, I kind of go like, yeah, okay, cool.
Mhm.
Like, then we agree.
Yeah.
Now, I don't refer to that thing as God. And I think there's a lot more work to do for the
There's
theist.
so much work to
Yeah.
do that it's almost useless, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
almost useless because ultimately it's like, all right, it's God in the gaps, but I'm going to kick the can so far that you
Yes.
that you and I will never have to engage with anything about that God. We're just going to kick the can so far, and so I'm not a fan of that. While I think it might be a valid proof for the existence of God, like I think Thomas Aquinas was correct in his use of that way of thinking, right? I find that it's probably not going to get us where I really want to go, which where I really want to go would be to say, do you, and I'm not, I don't mean this as a question, but more of like a rhetorical question of like, do you behave as if love is real? Do you behave as if the truth is real, and that we have to submit ourselves to love, that we have to submit ourselves to the truth, and that we have to? And now I'm going to use all the woo-woo language again, right? But that
Hey, sometimes woo language is
it's all we got. It's all we got.
No,
It's like trying to talk about the very beginning of time in the universe. We don't have the words to describe it,
Yep.
and none of our physics describe it very well, and none of our, we run out of it. We start saying it. If we use the language that we would use for Newtonian physics about the beginning of time, the beginning of the world, it's absurd, right?
Yeah.
So I go back to just, I think, which is basic language and basic kind of like feelings that most of us deal with of like, why do you think there's good and evil in the world? Do you think that there's something like justice? I was mentioning justice as one of those transcendentals. Like, do you think that some situations are more just than others? And in the end, all of those things seem to be the kind of stuff that I have to bend my knee and worship. If like that's what I mean by worship, right? By worship, I mean I submit to them as a thing outside of me that makes me behave as if those things are true, which I think is what we call belief, which is why I would very quickly raise my hand and say I'm absolutely not an atheist, because I worship these things that I think are real. And they've come to me through Christianity. Thank goodness. I believe that that's the truth. I believe that all that stuff is true. I believe that that's the revelation of God. That's what God has revealed to me about those things. But like for me, when I say I'm a believer and I am a theist, it's because I'm behaving like a theist. And this is, again, I certainly don't want to sound insulting to any atheist, but I don't run into a whole lot of atheists that convince me that they don't believe in truth or beauty or love or justice or being itself. Like I don't run into a lot of people who really behave like that, because if they don't believe in that, I'm not sure. And this is going back to Sartre and Camus. I'm not sure I'm not sure what they would do with their life other than want to end it. You know?
This is the brothers Karamazov, or what, the Jordan
Mm-hmm.
Peterson book that he always talks about, right? This is what he says, like an actual atheist would murder his annoying old lady neighbor because she was, nobody liked her anyway, and she had no family. So what's the harm in killing her, right?
Or he'd have to deal with the whole second set of things, and I'm going back to the French existentialist. Have to deal with the stare, the look. That they'd have to deal with that feeling that you don't want to be judged as bad, and like maybe you don't believe in a real goodness, but I bet you're more likely to act as though you believe in good and bad than you are to act like you don't believe in it. Which I don't want to like push you into a camp that you don't want to belong in, but like it certainly feels like, it certainly sounds like everybody I know behaves this way.
Yeah, maybe I can ask a clarifying question though, and that would be, if we have this whole group of people, and they're telling us that they don't believe in X, but then they act in ways that we think they would only act if they thought that X was true. What are we to do with that kind of information? Because it seems to me like one can't put themselves in the other person's shoes without first being convinced of that position that we are saying we think that you would act the other way. Mm-hmm. And the reason I ask this question, and yes, Kyle, yes, I did call the brothers Karamazov the Jordan Peterson book. Leave me alone, Kyle. Leave me alone. It's been a long day. But the reason I ask that question is because I used to be one of those people who said that if I ever became an atheist, I would murder and I would steal and I would do whatever I wanted to do. And I said if I ever became an atheist. I don't call myself an atheist, but I think that I fit the description of the kind of person that I was describing back when I used to say these things. Now, I was immature when I was saying these things. For sure. That was an immature understanding. Like the way that I was saying it was immature, for sure. But there is some more mature version of what I said when I was younger that would fit my description of who I am now, and yet I don't behave all that differently. And so when I hear that if I truly believed X, I wouldn't behave how I do. Mm-hmm. I do behave how I do. Therefore, I probably do secretly believe X, or at least if I don't secretly believe it, like I subconsciously believe it or something like that. When I hear stuff like that, I kind of just scratch my head and I say like, well, I can't prove to you what I believe and what I don't believe. All I can do is tell you. Mm-hmm. And I'm probably better situated to tell you what I believe than you. And so like, but then we're kind of just at this crossroads, right? Where we can't.
Yeah. So maybe another way that I could put it instead of like kind of like pushing beliefs on you or saying, no, you believe and you just don't know it.
And you didn't say that, for the record. Yeah. You did not say that. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope I'm not guilty of thinking it even. Right. But, but there is a sense where I do struggle not to do that, because it seems like, hey, I'm watching your behavior. How does it not? How does that not coincide with belief? Right? How does that not coincide with all those things? So I want to be careful not to put labels on you that you are explicitly denying, and I want to be careful not to do all those things. But I do have to admit that there's like I know that my dog doesn't understand all kinds of things about the world and all this kind of stuff like that, but there's a couple things he gets that he understands. So you go outside, you lower the tailgate of the truck, and that dog believes he belongs in that tailgate of that truck, and he runs and he jumps in there and he's ready to go, and he believes that we're going hunting, and that dog was bred to hunt, he was just made for it, and everything about his behavior says I was made to hunt. I just look at people and I feel like we just seem like people who were made to believe. And that's hard for me to get away from.
So I actually agree in a way. So let me kind of qualify that statement now. But I have read some pretty interesting papers. I think I'm gonna butcher the name of this paper, but there's something like there's some kind of paper called "The Tiger in the Bush: Human Religiosity Through the Something," and the whole thrust of the paper is that it's evolutionarily advantageous for the human to believe in the proverbial tiger in the bush. I don't know if you're familiar with that idea.
I think it's becoming clear for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's why we look at an outlet on the wall and we see a face.
Yes. Yeah.
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 Okay. All right.
And so your survivability increases if you are more superstitious.
Mm-hmm.
And so that might kind of program in funny things into the human psychology, and survivability of the group might increase if we do believe in this kind of transcendent good. You know, if we think that if the human species is more likely to survive if we're all programmed with this transcendent good in us,
yeah,
then it might, that might be an explanation.
Yeah. So I wonder what Nietzsche would say about this, right? So it's been a long time since I read Nietzsche, and I know that I think most serious, honest philosophers don't give him a whole lot of credibility. But certainly he would say you got this slave morality and this master morality, and he was in fact kind of making a call for us returning to the Ubermensch mentality of like you take what you deserve it if you can take it, and all that sort of stuff. And I'm kind of like, why wouldn't that law of the jungle? Why would the law of the jungle apply to everybody but humans, and then humans be able to excel without the law of the jungle being a bad thing for us? We consider that bad, so then we excel as a human race, but it's all an illusion.
Yeah, so I think that the law of the jungle thing is kind of interesting because the law of the jungle, in as much as that means kill or be killed, you look out for number one and that's it, really only applies to a small subset of animals, like solitary predatory hunters, and that's kind of it. Even certain predators don't really obey the law of the jungle. Lions have societies where they do look out for each other. Now, lions probably aren't a great example because they will eat each other's young and stuff like that. Like one pride will go eat the young of the other.
And the male with his own harem will kill any cubs that he thinks might belong to somebody else. And we look at that and we say the more noble the animal, the less they behave that way, right? So we would look at, for example, of course, we've bred a lot of these animals to behave the way that they behave as well. So the dogs and the horses and all these kind of things, they kind of behave a certain way. But we tend to look at things and say, I find something admirable whenever the lion protects the pride from the jackals or whatever. I don't know. I'm not
right.
But when we see that kind of behavior, we're impressed with it. And we say, well, I kind of want to emulate some of those things. And we even call people who do great things, the lion of whatever, and so we still judge those things by a standard that I'm thinking it transcends all that other stuff, So I guess I can't help but think when that do you believe that human beings are at the top of the heap, right? At the top of that heap. And so you're saying you don't. If I'm putting thoughts in your mouth,
I think you're correct with what you're about to say.
The heap might not exist at all.
Exactly.
There's no such thing as a heap.
Exactly.
And I'm looking at it and I'm saying I cannot help but believe that the human beings are at the top of that heap, and we got this way because we look up. Okay, so here's a good example. Are you familiar with Ovid, the poet Ovid?
The name, yes, but the work, no.
Time-wise, contemporaneous with Jesus Christ, right? So it's great to kind of see what the Romans were saying, who what the Romans were writing when they were in Rome. And he talks about in the middle of these terrible, poetry that just includes a whole lot of very unchristian things. He does say that human beings, unlike the animals who look to the ground for their next meal, right? Who graze the grass, and I'm paraphrasing, who graze this grass, as that's where their life comes from. Human beings look up to the stars, and they see this sort of hereditary. They look up to the stars and they say, the stars are my ancestors. The stars are like God is my father, is kind of what he's trying to express. I look up to the sky and I say, God is my father, in a way that animals don't, even when they occasionally behave in a way that might even look altruistic, right? I still, human beings there's a quantum difference between the way that animals behave and the way that human beings behave. And I cannot help but think, again, anything else seems absurd, that human beings are better because of this, and that there's a depth and a texture to our knowledge of the world that goes so far beyond a sort of like self-enlightened or I'm sorry, selfish self-interest, but enlightened self-interest, right? It feels like I'm just in a very different world from that. And it feels like my neighbor is the same. And it feels like really that's sort of what creates the peace, is when I can recognize that even people who disagree with me a ton deserve my respect and my love and my everything. I want to serve my neighbor even when they're my enemy. And that's where I'm kind of like, okay, now I'm starting to sound like a real Christian here, but that's
Yeah.
where all this has led me. That's where all this keeps leading me.
Yeah. If I can end on one note, it'll be a note of like mostly agreement, and it'll be that I will echo like 99% of the moral claims that Christians make. There's a few key areas where I disagree, but like 99, like me and Christians at large all think that, it's, killing people with no good reason is not good. Don't do it. Stealing stuff from people, yeah, knock that off. All that stuff, we're going to agree. The difference is kind of in the details. And what I mean by that is just Christians will say it is like objectively wrong, and I will say it's subjectively wrong, but we'll still agree. So you said that like the heap for me doesn't exist, and that's strictly speaking correct. But I will say that the heap to me subjectively exists in the sense that I don't care. And this is where the vegans, get mad at me, but I don't care about animals dying if it means feeding humans. I don't care. Yeah. I do care about humans.
Yeah.
Why? It's a subjective thing. For me, it is a subjective thing. But that subjective agreement that I just care about humans means that I reach 99% of the same conclusions that Christians do.
Yeah. And I would end on quoting Homer Simpson and saying that if God didn't want us to eat animals, he wouldn't have made them out of meat. So to me, it's all part of the natural order of things as well. Like to me, my whole worldview is built around the concept of all these things. So
cool. We've got a few questions, if you don't mind. With a couple minutes left, we'll go to questions.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
So Nick's Highlander had an interesting question. I'm going to paraphrase the question a little bit. Nick's Highlander says, I'm curious, what's the best argument, like the argument that could kill simple deism or theism? I guess I'll take a swing at it first, Father, and then you can take a swing at it after. And to me, I'm not sure, Nick's Highlander. I think that if there was some kind of syllogism that ended with, like, therefore God could not exist, well then, okay, there's your silver bullet. But I have no idea what kind of syllogism that would be or how that would end. And it would really have to kind of demonstrate that God is a married bachelor, or God is a triangle with four sides. Something that just violates the laws of logic. And I just don't think that any conception of God does. Well, no, I won't say any, because I guess I can imagine some concept of a God that does. But
and even then you would be putting reason above the God that I think is reason, right? So you would be using a syllogism, using logic, using reason, using ultimately the constructs of truth, or the scaffoldings of truth to say that there isn't a God that I say is truth. So that wouldn't be the way to get there, I think.
Yeah. So sorry for the non-answer, Nick's Highlander, but I that's kind of where we are. Got another one from William. So William observes, he says, I don't think that Kevin denies theism or deism or theism, as long as you define your theism or deism in some kind of first causation. I'll just kind of say, I mean, if you define it that way, then yes. Most people have a concept that goes much further than just a first cause. Like, I think that there's shockingly few deists in the world. I think most of your people who believe in a God are going to go further than just a first cause. But if you do define it that way, then yes. And what do you think?
Yeah, Father? And I would echo that, and I would say that with the one exception was that if I'm going back to what makes a person a believer or not a believer, I'd say just look at how they behave and how they, what are they banking on? What is it clear that they are operating at? What are the assumptions they seem to be operating out of? And I would say that there are shockingly a lot of people who operate out of the idea that, maybe there's a God, or there is a God, but I don't think he cares about what I really do or don't do. Like I can get away with this or get away with that. And I'll call upon that God when I need something, maybe, but it's going to take like a major thing for me to get down on my knees and pray to this God. I would say that to me indicates that no matter what they say, there are a lot of deists out there, so they at least behave like deists.
Okay. Fair enough. From Dave, he tagged me and he said, Kevin, why use the term agnostic? You either believe in God or you don't. And so this kind of goes back to what Father and I were talking about with like, how do you define the term atheist? So there's that whole lacktheist term in there. So if you're saying that an agnostic, like there's no agnostics, there's just, you either believe in God or you do not believe in God, either X or not X, then I suppose that agnostic falls under that not X category. But atheist is generally not like a catch-all term for agnostics and atheists. That's why we have the term agnostic, because agnostics are the ones who are not committing to God definitely does not exist. That's why I use the term.
Yeah. I can kind of relate to what Dave is saying though, in the sense that like I am, agnostic in terms of the number of miles between the Earth and the Moon. Like in some sense, you can tell me it's 1,000, you can tell me it's 10,000. I'm not sure that any of those would matter to how I behaved, or that I don't feel the need to have to accept any of those answers above any other answers or whatever. But when it comes to God, I kind of get where Dave is coming from. If I understand him right, that there seems to be a real important question that most people have a hard time staying in a state of not committing to one belief or the other.
Yeah.
You're right. Like Kevin, everything you said is true, but I also sort of see where I think I see where Dave's coming from with that question. It seems to matter so much that it's hard to be settled with not knowing, or not believing.
Yeah, I do agree, and I think that a lot of the answer is kind of semantics, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like it's just kind of like, well, what do you mean by agnostic and all that? Right. Got one more, and this is an earlier one from Nick's Highlander as well. Would you say, and he didn't tag anybody, so we can both answer this one. Would you say that silicon-based life or ammonia-based life could love? My response to that is, yeah. Love might involve different chemicals now, like our brains are mostly carbon-based, and we use like serotonin is our happy chemical, and so I think that love has a lot to do with serotonin. That might be different if silicon-based life or ammonia-based life used different chemicals, but I imagine that there would be some kind of chemical that induced feelings of affection. So I would say, yeah, sure. And I think Father's answer is probably also going to be yes, but I'll let Father tell you.
I'm gonna say, well, first of all, I'm going to say I'm agnostic on this because I've never seen it, and I don't know that it matters enough for me to feel a certain way or not. And I've never even thought about this question. It's actually kind of an interesting question. Thank you for the question. It's really interesting. But I believe that when we love, that we are manifesting the Spirit of God, in our lives. And so I'm not sure that silicon or ammonia or carbon, that's a necessary, like I'm not sure that it has to be one or the other or anything like that. Like I think that when you manifest God's nature in your life, that is what we call that's what I call love. And so the material that manifests that is less important to me, but then again, I've never seen it, right? So I guess the closest I've seen is like a computer. Can a computer love? Insofar as it can manifest God's love in it, usually that comes through the programmer first, or something.
Yeah. That was it for questions. I would like to end with a comment earlier from SJ. Father John Brown has so many valuable insights.
Oh, that's so nice of her. Thank you.
He really does. Father Brown, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on my show. Thank you for being the first priest on my show.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I greatly enjoyed it.
Me too. I've got the forever last question for you. What are you working on? Do you have a sermon that you're excited about coming up? idea for a book percolating in there? What's going on with
So
you?
my main job is I'm actually the president of a high school, so that
That's right.
just sucks up all of my everything. So in fact, I find YouTube to be incredibly helpful as a way for me to sort of force myself to give some attention to things that are outside of the and not really outside, but aren't worried about, is this young man gonna make the grades he needs to make to be able to walk on the stage at graduation, or worried about this taxes for the school, about what applies and what doesn't apply, or the baseball team, are they going to win? So YouTube in a sense has been a great way of keeping me well-rounded in my daily life. So actually, I have a YouTube channel. It's if you search for, my username is Father John Brown SJ, no punctuation there, just all one word. And I have been putting my sort of like daily homily reflections during Lent up. So I have several videos now that are all pretty short. They're aimed at the choir, so not everybody's going to love them, but they are just short, sort of like, hopefully insightful reflections on the Gospels.
Awesome. Father, this was a blast. Thank you so much. I'm going to link your YouTube channel in the description down below.
Great. Thank you.
And thanks again, Father.
I really appreciate it.